Hi, and welcome to our third part of our series in community accountability. Today, we're going to be talking about what taking accountability looks like in community. If you missed any of the other parts, the first or second part, they are recorded and on the NSN's website in the resource tab, as well as on the YouTube channel. So this is a four-part series in collaboration with the National Survivor Network, which is a program of CAST, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. My name is Rebekah Layton. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a master's degree in restorative justice candidate for spring of 2023. Thanks for having me and joining me in this community conversation. So our agenda for today, we're going to do some inquiry into community building strategy type things, but it's really just from our community accountability. And we're going to talk about some of the hows, the whys, the whos. And then we're going to kind of go into identifying areas of growth and what growth looks like from an accountability perspective. And then we're going to identify some of the ways change happens and how we adapt as a community and how we get to a place of growing together. And then we will go into a summary and kind of set up where our last part of our next series of the series is going to go. So this is Principled Struggle. It is by Natanya Lee, and this was taken from a book called Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy, Facilitation, and Mediation, and it can be found on page 48. We struggle for the sake of deepening our collective understanding and getting to greater unity. Be honest and direct while holding compassion. Take responsibility for your own feelings and actions. Keep deeper understanding. Ask and read first. Consider that this may or may not be the container to hold what we need to bring. Consider side convos, one-on-one conversations, when having them should help us get better understanding, not take out. So the test that they suggest that we use is, could I bring the essence of this conversation back to the group? So the idea is, if we are having side conversations, is it benefiting us or is it not? Things to consider. When we are talking about community accountability and how to do this, we need to talk about a few different things. Boundaries, community care, self-reflection, self-care, and transformative growth. So boundaries are incredibly important for us to protect ourselves and to know where our values line and what our hard stopping points are. But I also think that boundaries should be seen as an act of self-care as opposed to walls. And because sometimes those rigid walls can keep us from being able to enter into community because those walls have been built to protect us from harms that we've endured. So while boundaries are an act of self-care, it's also a way for us to move into places that may feel uncomfortable or outside of our norms, because we can rely on the boundaries that are our hardline stopping points and what we need to feel safe and what we need to maintain our peace within the community setting, especially when we're addressing harm, past harms, or the possibility of future harms or other things that have happened that may be breaking down community. Because the goal is really to be our authentic selves while being in community. And then while considering our boundaries and what we need, we also start looking at what community care looks like. There's various models that could be explored, just like mutual aid. But essentially the idea is, how are we showing up for people? What do they need? How are we meeting people in the moment? And it's not what we think people need, but it's actually what other folks need. in part of our discussion from part 2, somebody brought up how meaningful community care can be. And I just really wanted to highlight that because one of the examples was, bringing food when someone's sick or watching someone's kids, and how meaningful that those little acts can be for folks. And so starting to look at community care as, if we have a chosen community, how are we showing up for community? And then self-reflection and self-care kind of go hand in hand with boundaries. But self-reflection is more of like a practice. It becomes a practice of looking inward and checking how we're entering into community, and acknowledging our own faults and any harms that we may have caused as well. Self-care within our relationships, and also a central focus for repairing from harm. So in this conversation, self-care is a way of preserving your peace while also entering into a relationship and repairing harm, so that we can have more complex and nurturing relationships with others who we're in community with. It's also a way of saying, I need to stay within a container that does not have me in a position to be further harmed by somebody else who may be in the community. We can have grace and love for other folks without having to go beyond our boundaries, especially if we've been harmed by them in the past. And then transformative growth is really just kind of been this like underlying component of all of the conversations we've been having, right? Where creating a community culture is a process. It's a learning process. It's not linear. It's going to move. It's going to have ups and downs. And it's a matter of building a space where we have a community culture that is okay with change, and taking a step back and kind of analyzing and addressing where we are at various stages throughout our community's growth and development together. So Prentice Hemphill is someone I admire very much, and they have a quote in Holding Change, The Ways of Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown. And Prentice Hemphill says, boundaries are responsive, movable, and highly dependent on real life assessments. Boundaries are how you guide and protect your life energy. The skillful use of boundaries allow us to create proximity, intimacy, and distance. So I think it's really important for us to reflect on this. It's beyond just walls. It's a way of what Prentice says is real life assessments. That one really sticks out to me, as well as creating proximity, intimacy, and distance. So it's kind of allowing for all of the elements of relationship and what happens throughout relationship and community. So this diagram, I think, helps to kind of give a more tangible way of kind of looking at this. And I think it's important to kind of keep some of these things into consideration when we start talking about containers and how we create those containers within our community to have difficult conversations and to create more sense of protection and belonging for everyone within that conversation. And so I think so here we have connectedness and learning are your two big bubbles that intersect with all of the others. With connectedness, we have membership, trust, belonging, and acceptance. And with learning, we have needs are satisfied, support, common goals, knowledge actively created. And so I think the connectedness is really interlinked with learning, but also very different, right? We need to feel connected to our community through acceptance, belonging, trust, and other emotions and needs that may arise, and being able to voice those needs, whatever those needs are. And learning is how we continue to create the connectedness and how we continue to meet the needs. So we're satisfying needs, we're supporting those needs, we're continuing to embrace common goals, especially if those goals are shifting. How do we continue to learn how to hold people where they need to be held? And how do we continue to acknowledge and actively create all of this connectedness and learning together? So some of the conversation I think that's really important for us to have is this containers for holding space. So there's growth, vulnerability, boundaries, honesty, and grace. So for growth, holding a space for people to learn and explore, right? We have sometimes we enter into community at various stages in our journeys, and sometimes there's more that we need to learn than others, and sometimes there's things that we need to learn from each other, and also sometimes there's things that we need to take the time and space to learn before we enter into community, so that the burden's not all on other community members to teach us. And then I think there's space for vulnerability. We need to be vulnerable about what is needed, about feelings of isolation from the collective, and about asking for change. So we need to create, if we go back to the last slide, this connectedness here, right? If we can create connectedness and a foundation for safe space, for emergent space, for brave spaces, we move through growth and vulnerability into a place of being able to challenge where we are now and ask the community for what we need, and also be able to be honest with ourselves with what we need. And that's kind of where the boundaries come in, right? Where we have boundaries that are supporting growth and change and healthy conflict, as opposed to creating walls and isolation. And I think that's something that's really complex to navigate, especially when we come from spaces of trauma responses as well, right? And so I think honesty and vulnerability also go really hand in hand. We need to be honest about what is working and what's not, being open to do things different, and being honest about what you bring or I bring, positive or negative, and honest about where you draw the line, right? And that's going back to our boundaries. Like, this is what I'm willing to learn, right? And this is what I'm willing to say, like, okay, maybe this boundary needs to adjust in this space because this space is more safe or less safe, and why, right? And then I think at the end of the day, we need to have grace for each other, always within reason, right? You know, abuse doesn't stop unless it's acknowledged. But when unintentional harms happen, if we hold grace for the people who have caused the harm, then we hold people's humanity while honoring the need for boundaries within them, or boundaries with them, if they have caused harm and are no longer serving for our peace, right? And then that's where we say, okay, is there a space where we can address this harm, and how do we go about doing that? And that's where these containers kind of come into place. So containers kind of look like various different things. There's various models where people do pod mapping. There might be a person who's caused harm, the person who's been harmed, and then you can create a container of people who are surrounding the person who's been harmed, and then the person who has caused harm also has a container of people around them, right? And these could be various different things that are based off of the agreements of how we're going to do the intervention and co-creating accountable spaces. So this could be, and there could be further circles around people, right? And this I'm kind of drawing from various spaces of transformative and restorative justice processes, and learning from peacekeeping circles and talking circles, and just various ways in which communities and other movement spaces have been doing for a really long time. So if we create agreements, then we have something to fall back on, and something that we've all agreed to continue and to maintain. So for example, within the NSN, it's a values-based membership. And so those values have been agreed on by the group, by the collective. And so it's a matter of being able to lean on those agreements, right? And saying, okay, these are the values that each of us have agreed to maintain. And if one of those values has not been held, then how do we address that? So we create spaces that create a foundation of grace that allows for difficult conversations, and we allow for being curious. We also create a line that doesn't get crossed. And that's when we start protecting people within those spaces. And then how do we intervene? So how do we step in when harm is witnessed or has happened? We have to create as a group what that would look like, right? And that's where those containers also kind of come into place. We create space for those who have caused harm to come into community with intention in a way that does not breed adversarial conflict. So by adversarial, this I'm right, no, I'm right. And it's, you can look at it kind of like a courtroom where you have the defense on one side and the prosecution on the other. And it's more so like a game of who's winning versus how are we coming together and going through this conflict. And I think that there's a place of, beauty that can come from conflict as long as we're doing it in the right way. And we come with grace, and we also have to ask tough questions, like really honest questions. And then we look into how we co-create accountable space. So this is going to be where we start designing and implementing what accountability looks like based off of our agreements and how we decided we will go into these spaces. So what is our how and what is our why? So I think those are kind of how we co-create. So instead of having a couple of people who have decided this is how we're going to deal with conflict within our community, instead we come together as a community, those who want to, at least who are comfortable coming into these conversations, say, what is our how? So how are we going to do the thing? And what is our why? What is our purpose? And then we have to have some what ifs. So what if something happens that we're not expecting? Or what if there could be a lot of what ifs, but we have to think of what are all the what ifs, plan for all of the things that could arise, and how we're going to do our best to try and acknowledge those and deal with those as they do arise. And then centering the one who has been harmed while honoring the humanity of the one who has caused harm is, I think, really important for maintaining a space that's safe enough, or at least comfortable enough, for people to come forward when they have caused harm without having to be called out. It's incredibly important to name the harm, voice the harm, and to address it and to intervene when harm is caused. I think it's the how we do that creates and breeds a space of people feeling more comfortable to come forward on their own and be accountable on their own without having to be called out and without people having to intervene. Who has caused harm? The one who has caused harm must be vulnerable and accountable and make amends. The person who's been harmed has to really voluntarily enter into, especially if we're doing a very formal kind of intervention or community, like a peace talks or community building talks, or even a restorative process, if we were to go into a space like that. But even just in general, like, how are we having these conversations? The person who was harmed has to really be the one to step in and say, I want this to happen. I think we need to discuss this. And they really have to be the ones who kind of pushes it forward within reasonable, accommodations. And then the one who's caused the harm has to be willing to voluntarily come forward and be accountable, and to listen to what that harm was, which can be really hard to come forward and apologize, or to acknowledge the harm that you've caused. And so I think this is where we kind of create almost like a continuum of care. And that term's really used in more like public health type spaces, and they start talking about like determinants of health and things like that. But this continuum of care that I see within this space and in this conversation is kind of within this circle. We have support, we have care, we have courage, and we have growth. So we have to have a supportive environment in order to have the courage to acknowledge where we've been. And we also have to have a culture of care that supports that courage, right? So we care for the person who's been harmed, but we also care for the person who's caused harm, giving them space to hopefully acknowledge the harm they've caused and to move forward. But it also kind of keeps these containers, right? There's a container of support, there's a container of care, there's a container of growth, and a container of courage. These all kind of can intersect, but they're also have to really be supported in their own right as well. And then what do we need to ask in order to determine the how? So are we asking the right questions in the first place? Are we creating a space that makes it as safe as possible for all parties involved and for community? Are we asking the right questions? Are we setting and maintaining healthy boundaries? Are we exploring the context? Are we currently addressing harm? Is it working? Why or why not? And then we have to ask, now what? Right? We have to acknowledge our biases. We have to also acknowledge our trauma responses and our own agendas, either or both within the space and in our own space outside of community, and how we're entering into community, because a lot of harm happens around internal bias, and also, in a place of trauma response, harm can happen. And sometimes we bring in agendas that we maybe haven't even acknowledged yet. So it kind of goes back to that self-reflection, self-care, self-awareness, and some of those, and being self-aware enough in community to not cause further harm if we are the one causing harm, but also how we're addressing harm and making sure that we're really trying to not do this from a trauma response type of thing, which is really incredibly hard, especially for many of us who have been through some pretty intense traumas, right? And then once we've kind of asked some of these more self-reflective type of questions, then we kind of can look at the next part, which is the how will we? How will we hold change? Which is adapted from Adrienne Marie Brown's work. And how will we hold boundaries? And how will we create containers around those who have been harmed or caused harm in a way that honors the individual? How are we going to address the context to hold the truth, as well as space for accountability and transforming and changing? How will we be flexible and open to change through accountability, both collectively and individually? So the how continues into the fact that we get to decide the how and the why. How are we apologizing? Is forgiveness actually in the equation? Sometimes forgiveness is not actually necessary. We don't always have to forgive someone who's caused us harm. Forgiveness is really for the individual person, not the person who caused harm. Sometimes harm creates the real truth that two people or two parts of community maybe need to stay away from each other, and maybe containers need to be built around them in order to allow them both to be within community and both be supported, but also be getting what they need as individuals to maintain their own safety within the space. And then, are we acknowledging our grief? Because there is real grief that happens when harm happens, or when we're especially in a community of of folks who have all come in with their own lived experience and their own griefs, and how do we acknowledge and really hold grief in space together and also individually. Are we continuing to learn what has or has not worked and adapting with that? Are we actively participating in rewriting our stories and our narratives around how we as a community decide we want to grow together collectively, while also embracing everyone's beautiful individual selves? And then we have to ask, what else and who else? What else could we be doing? And who else should we be including? And so I took these directly from the 4 Pivots: Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves by Sean A. Ginwhite, who's a PhD. And in this, Sean talks about hindsight versus foresight. And it's a really incredible book. I highly suggest everyone go and read it. But it breaks down hindsight versus foresight and says that hindsight doesn't always come from reflecting on past mistakes, though mistakes offer us great lessons. Hindsight is a culmination of lessons from key events, dilemmas, and situations in the past. Foresight, on the other hand, is the capacity to imagine a possible future. Foresight pushes us to embrace the lessons from the past in order to reimagine, predict, and create what we want in our lives and in society. I want to leave you with this, not only because I think this is a really good way to wrap up kind of some of these hows and whys, but also to bring us into the last part, which is going to be about building resilient communities. We've talked a lot about how we want to address harm, and we've talked about how we grow collectively as a community and how we can be strategic in doing that. But I also have hinted a little bit at some of these ideas of possibility thinking, right? And like, where are we going with this? And I think it's a really hard place for us to even start to imagine a future that we don't see as even being possible. When we come from spaces of harm and a lot of negativity in our pasts and in our presents, and just kind of seeing how humanity is with each other, sometimes it can be really hard to think about where we're going in our future and how we're ever going to create these spaces that may seem so far out of reach. And I think that it's really important for us to come into this place of belonging and acceptance, right? We accept the things we can't change, but who knows what could happen in our future, right? We talked a little bit about honoring those who have planted the seeds that have come before us or that are currently doing the work. And I don't think that we can even honor the seeds that have already been planted and the work that so many movements have done in human rights spaces and in anti-violence spaces and in community building spaces and restorative and transformative spaces. We're not honoring them if we're not also looking at the future and imagining what could happen. And that's really hard sometimes when we come from a place of resource seeking or survival. And so how do we start moving into thriving and being resilient and just really enjoying and embracing the now, and also just, I don't know, I feel this sense of need to really create a space where it's okay to imagine things that may seem impossible. And I just want to leave you with that. I want to leave you with the how is not just about addressing the harm, And accountability is not just about addressing the harm. It's about addressing harm and addressing change, being accountable for ourselves, but also not holding ourselves back from what we could achieve if we do it together. And also, just being in this space of imagining. So I want to challenge each of you to take 5 or 10 minutes to yourself and imagine. If you took away all the barriers and all of the things that kept you from imagining where you see yourself and where you see a community, our community, what would that look like? So that's my challenge for you. Thank you for being here with me today. And I really look forward to talking with you guys further and having a great conversation.